basically we are looking at mind the age gap. I mean, how is this happening over the demographic dividend, and what it means in terms of gender, in terms of public spaces, in terms of the relationships between the genders, and so on and so forth. So we have two people here who have been working, one on gender and violence, and the other one in work participation of women in labor force. And therefore, we are going to have to start asking them first, what do they feel about this new demographic patterns that are emerging in the country. We pride ourselves by saying that we are the youngest population in the world, and therefore everybody has no option but to come to India. But on the other hand, what actually are we doing? Is this demographic dividend happening in terms of its advantages? Like, for example, the famous sunstroke we have in every Indian family. Has this created a bigger gap in the younger population? What we call as our advantage in demographic dividend. And is this creating issues in our environment? And if so, what are these issues? Now, may I ask Hemlata first to talk about how this pans out in terms of the research that she is doing.
Thank you. So, beginning to talk about the larger demographic pyramid currently in the country, what we are seeing is that over the years of the health and education policy and the larger efforts on the social justice front, we have seen a lot of impacts of that on the demographic pyramid of the country. And of late, we've started to see, like at the base of the pyramid, when you see the first set of the population group that is from 0 to 4, where we are seeing the kind of infant mortality come down. So, and at the same time, parallelly, the fertility rates in the country also going down. So the bulge of the population, which was always there in the 0 to 4 age category, that pyramid on the base is now slowly shrinking. So that's the factual reality coming out from all the government data and census, as you all have been talking about in the morning also. So these are the official data. So what are the social implications of, given the larger policy, institutional and the gender normative context, what is it leading to? Some of the immediate implications of it that we are seeing is there was always son preference, right? And so the new demographic trend has not really helped in any way in challenging the normative areas. If the fertility rates are going down, certainly people preferring to have lesser number of children, and sons there are a preference. However, despite the son preference, interestingly, more number of girls are still being born, naturally. More number of girls are being born. But when we see into 5 to 10 age category, that the number of girls, the population, like after 1 year or so, when the sex ratio, the number of girls is coming down, it's largely due to the discriminatory practices around caregiving that we see. A lot of girls either do not survive, and of course there is the sex selective abortion is anyways there. So the overall demographic journey of the country, I'm going to trace the gendered journey of where we are leading and how it has always been, and the new nuances of how the policies are catering to only a certain age group, which is in the reproductive age, which is, if you talk about women, as well as also for men. So, and policies mostly currently are gender blind, apart from in the health sector, because that is where you are constantly talking about women as, means of reproduction. So whether it is the family planning policy, whether it is the laws around having more laws around workplace, harassment policies. So these are the kind of larger policy contexts in which we are there. But what is happening in the adolescence age group is that 10 to 19, in this again the gender nuances of growing up are very evident, that the girls still, we are struggling with the issue of teenage pregnancies, not owing to girls and boys' own choices of having sexual partners, but due to the issue of early and forced marriage. So again, in this age category, there are these gender nuances of growing up both for girls and boys. Early dropout of girls, again, because of child marriage or distances of schools from homes, and dropout of boys for informal sector work. So, and it's not that only girls are dropping out, the dropout rate of boys is also quite high. However, we see that still a larger number of boys continue to remain in the education system. But as compared to 2 decades ago, we still have more number of girls and women continuing to take up higher education. And I think as Poulomi would take it further, that what is happening there once the women and girls who got at least a basic education which they wanted to, after that what is happening when we see they are not able to participate in the workforce? And what kind of workforce are we talking about? Is it the formal or the informal sector? Probably you can take forward that nuance. But here is what the entire life cycle, when we look at from 0 to 4 age category, or during the adolescence period, or during the reproductive age like 20 to 50, the incidence of violence continuously at home and even in outside is really high for women. The interesting part is that when we look at the issue of gender and gender-based violence, currently the discourse is still settled at looking at women only as the side of, who need any kind of support or any kind of mechanisms of violence response or prevention. We fail to look at the side of the harmful masculinities, which also pose risk of a lot of violence on men as well. So that is where in the working age group or the reproductive age group, the focus on women does remain in the family planning and all this, at the same time facing violence at home, at workplace, outside, and the men's journeys of how they are experiencing the gendered workplaces, how they are kind of taking their privileges and not understanding what can be, are there spaces to really question that what can be done with those privileges? Do you want to let go of those privileges and make yourself seen as, again, the issue of benevolent sexism? So there are no spaces as such to talk about that as well. So I would right now stop here and let Poulomi take forward the workforce question.
What I would just intervene here is, before I hand over to Poulomi, we are talking about some statistics here. World Bank report released in September calls violence on women as a global pandemic. 1 in 3 women face in their lifetime. That is how they have defined it. And 35% of women, physical or emotional, with intimate partners. And rapes are very, very high, and it is development independent. That is, whether it is developed countries or underdeveloped countries, rape is something that is a very serious sexual, gender violence that is taking place. In India particularly, the violence cases are totally underreported. Rapes are very much underreported. And yet we have Sikkim and Delhi reporting 30.3 and 22.5 per 100,000 rapes. Whereas in Bihar and UP, less than 0.5% get reported. So we are talking about a widely varying kind of a thing where rape is a very common thing that's happening, and yet the reporting or action for it is very much lacking. Now coming to this empowerment, she rightly pointed out that there are people who are studying in both the genders, and both the genders there are dropouts as well. There are more in girls, but then there are girls who have been empowered, they have been educated, and participation is coming down. In fact, after the demonetization, the workforce participation of women has drastically dropped. In fact, among all the South Asian countries, the drop is very significant in India, and we are ashamed that we are down now to 26 to 28%. It is really shameful because all our neighboring countries in South Asia are much ahead of us. So that is the situation we are talking about, and on this issue, on the participation of women in labor at both ends of the spectrum, at the lowest end as well as the highest end, I'd like Paulomi to throw some light.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. Before I begin, I would like to mention that whatever I am speaking today is a lived-in participatory experiences. I am no expert on it because I have worked with several other women. Their lived experiences, they had trusted to share with me, and so have I learned. So I think this acknowledgement and disclaimer is very important before we start to speak about anyone else's and mine experience in the sector. Now, coming to women's participation in workforce, so we know the statistics, right? 26.7%, that's in India. 62% of the women work is unpaid, and these are all Indian statistics. I will come to it a little later. I would like to go back because now I think for the past few days and months we are speaking about partition in very many ways, right? So I am just going back to popular culture. A particular movie comes to my mind called Meghna Ka Tara by Hrithik Bhattar, which was also based on a novel by Shaktipat Rajguru. So that was a novel where I remember on screen seeing a working woman post-partition, the woman in her reproductive age, but the burden of partition actually falls on the woman. She starts working out of home and almost lives her entire life being almost a sacrificial lamb for the family. So her own longing, her own desires are, we see somehow getting killed, right? At the same point in time, we read research papers which speak about that particular era that says that the new displaced nation needs or demands women to come out on their own. So yes, we are speaking about agency, we are speaking about participation in workforce, but are we really speaking about agency? Because if you also speak about women and the roles that they played in surviving the families at that point of time. The movie was made in 1950, the story was written around partition. A little ahead, 1963, another movie, and because we are speaking about incomplete cities, so the movie is Mahanagar, once again about a big city. Once again, a middle class woman comes out of home, starts working, and this time she works in a formal workplace. The other one was doing tuitions, the other one was, we never had any pay commission at that point of time, some schools, etc., etc., the previous one. This one is a formal merchant office where she works as a canvasser, almost like a sales girl, going door to door. Very interesting things happen. The family this time almost participates to enable her to work because she is supporting the family at that point of time. But something interesting happens at the workplace. She had a colleague who is an Anglo-Indian woman who gets a kind of comment from her boss which she does not approve of. In today's time, it would have been called prevention of sexual harassment. At that point of time, it's not. But she chooses to show a spirit of sisterhood, and she calls it out and opts out from that work. And we see that the husband also standing shoulder to shoulder next to her, supporting. Cut to few more years. We read more stories, which now speaks about absolute despair of women post-partition once again, and post-71, when the Bangladesh movement is going on. We find now women entering workforce, but in informal labor, mostly as domestic help. And slowly the phenomenon spreads, and I'm speaking about typically West Bengal. So if you go to Canning, which is near Diamond Harbour, the suburban city of South 24 Parganas, you find that the early morning trains are all filled with women who are traveling to come to work in the city as domestic help. A few years later, and this is my own experience, 2017, I'm in a place in UP called Mau. Right. So this means that, of course, participation of women in workforce had started, and we will come to the statistics of formal, informal, regular, irregular policies which help them, policies which help them to retain, policies which also throw them off, doesn't recognize them. Those are the separate discussions. But 2017, which means if something has started as early as 1947, 44 rather, by 2017, I think people will be used to this aspect of women going out, working, doing something on their own, self-employment. So I remember I was sitting in this shop, and at that point of time we were trying to run a program which was onto women micro-entrepreneurship. Interestingly enough, on the area of starting small salons of their own. And I asked these men, because they were basically guarding, we still have not met any women, so they are representatives which were all male sitting there. So we asked them कि आपके इधर लड़कियाँ काम नहीं करती है बाहर, कुछ अपना सा करती नहीं, हमारे इधर कुछ नहीं करते हैं, नहीं जरूरी करती है करने के लिए. तो and then we kept on probing, क्योंकि हमारा तो काफी पेट का सवाल है, प्रोग्राम चलाना है, मोबिलाइज करना है, इन्हीं के थ्रू जाना है. So I still remember the language that was spoken, the word that नहीं मैडम इधर कुछ नहीं करती है, वो जो लड़कियाँ करती है ना, वो जो बेलगाम औरतें होती है ना, वो कुछ करती है, अदरवाइज वो नहीं करती है. So what I'm speaking about empirical evidence or lived anecdotal experiences, but when we're speaking about violence, it need not always be violence which is physical, violence which is completely like I lock you inside, I do something. It's also a very palpable violence which is garbed in the, it's garbed in the dress of protection, right? And especially the reproductive age and this entire patriarchal burden is so strong that from the very beginning there is an effort of impeding the process of you to going ahead. Leave aside higher education, I'm even coming to, if you go to any urban city, you will see this affordable private English medium schools going on. See the ratio of girls versus boys in this place. As long as there are public schools, free education, 8th standard, whatever education is happening, girls are still going to school. 8th to 9th, there is a drop that will happen the moment you will fail. And that's precisely where the entire skill training spectrum of what had happened, the entire juggernaut was surviving upon. Even between two children, parents are making a decision who should actually proceed and get the more opportunities. That's a larger battle that we need to fight. Now when it comes to formal workplaces, we also need to understand that how many women actually are coming to formal workplaces and what are those formal workplaces. A majority of women are, 98% of the caregiving economy is dominated, has got women employers there, and they do not have any policies because that is not even considered as work as such, right? The rest who are still coming to our formal workplaces, very few of them these days, a very interesting work we are hearing about gig economy, which is basically your contract labor. Whenever there is work, you are coming and working at that point of time. Which means whenever it comes to maternity benefits, whenever it comes to other, child care policies and every other thing, you are not subjected to this. So I recall a historian as well as social scientist, Mary Beard. She speaks vociferously about the hypocrisy of most of the policies in the formal workplace. She says that yes, childcare policies need to be there, empowering them, enabling them to take on bigger roles, going to the board, all these tropes of lean in, lean out, whatever, I will not even want to get into that. All needs to be true, but the larger system is so disempowering in nature, where you make women few in number, fight for breadcrumbs, where the entire politics of power are dominated by, by a very so-called interestingly intelligent male, then I think your chances of winning are anyways rigged most of the time. So, and that is where I would like to stop right now. And
if you take this interesting age of adolescence, okay, that is what both of you also spoke about at one point of time. In one particular category, I noticed a phenomenon, for the tribals, there are a lot of fellowships and free colleges and schools. And therefore, there are families who send the children to these schools, both girls and boys, because they are hostels, they are fed well, and therefore they continue their education. But what happens when they come back is neither of them is employable. They don't get employment. What happens is the girl goes back to the farm and starts working on the farm or doing any other kind of animal husbandry or any other kind of work at home. Whereas the boys, now that they're educated, they just don't do anything and they're just roaming around and good fodder for all the political people. So when you're talking about demographic changes, this is one place where we find that we agree that in the privileged society we have to have a lot of policies for girls, and we are having a lot of policies too. But when it comes to men, there are no behavioral change programs, there are no awareness programs, and there are no other empowering or enabling kind of programs at all. And this is where you will find that the gender gap and the age gap is really affecting the economy. I don't know, would you like to have a view on this, please?
So specifically, there has been a lot of pushback always on the specific work around, of engaging boys at adolescence age or working with men on the issue of gender. Now the pushback, interestingly, has not been from men or boys. The pushback has always largely been from, so I come from, from working with the feminist movement. And so a lot of the sections from within the feminist movement have always been very conservative around, like, why give that space or resources which are required right now to take the equitable measures for bringing the girls and women. Then it's an equitable, at least an equal race. So why are you taking away those resources and giving it away to men? So there has been a lot of resistance. So one reason why there have been lesser spaces, the work with, on working with men around gender equality did start around the time when we started to talk about the issue of sexually transmitted diseases and HIV. So engaging men was always in the garb of that. And mostly in that also, the role of men in the policies, even when the government reached out to men to say on the family planning or even on HIV risk reduction, it was in the larger, protectionist framework. Again, the institutions were not challenging the gender norms. So even if you are bringing in men, you are bringing them in either questioning them as perpetrators, bringing them in as supporters or protectors, but not someone who will challenge their own privileges and then think of the issue of gender equality together. So basically, there were pushbacks at many levels. So right now, but we feel globally as well as in India, there is a very good environment which is coming up within a lot of community-based programs that a lot of NGOs and civil society organizations are trying to engage young boys and men on the issue of challenging gender norms and looking at the issue of harmful masculinities and not just being masculine as just one specific trait of a man. So there is a growing space for that. However, the government policy and the government space or the institutional space for this is still shut because we are looking men with a very instrumentalist approach again as, okay, you can take a paternal leave, what is it called? Paternity leave. Paternity leave for 15 days or 1 month, whatever. So it is like thoda tum bhi le lo type. It's not about that. You cannot create a zero-sum game when you're talking about equality or equitable measures. So, and because of which, whenever we start about talking about gender equality at the very beginning level, like for example, we are working currently with, a set of school teachers in Rajasthan's Sirohi and Udaipur district. As soon as we start the conversations with them about challenging harmful masculine norms, the thing is, the debate goes on to men versus women. It is not. It's not that. We are looking at the larger systemic processes which actually pitches men against women. So, the debate becomes very instrumentalist at the core when you and I start talking about it, unless there are larger institutional spaces to where the government initiates gender norm change, where your policies reflect the gender norm change. You do not reach out to men as co-decision makers in the family planning decision, where you say कि पहले मेरी बीवी को नहीं पता था कि इंजेक्टेबल भी होता है क्योंकि ये अनपढ़ थी, और फिर उसके बाद मेरे को गवर्नमेंट ने बोला कि तुम भी फैमिली प्लानिंग प्रोग्राम में आओ, मैं जाने लगा उसके साथ में, एंड देन मुझे पता चला कि इंजेक्टेबल बहुत अच्छा है, सो मैंने अपनी बीवी को बोला तुम इंजेक्टेबल इस्तेमाल करो. नाउ दिस इज अ नैरेटिव ऑफ he got to know of the choice, he got to take the decision. Again, for whatever. But again, आपने involve किया उनको, but there was no collective decision making. So everywhere using men or the issue of gender equality, bringing men on board in a very, very instrumentalist way, or whenever showing it as a threat, posing it as like a zero-sum game. कि भैया तुम लोग अपना privileges छोड़ दो, नहीं तो ये तो लेने तो वैसे भी वाली हैं. No, that's not the language. And what more is feeding it into it is the larger national level discourse that is currently being created. That we have classes 6, 7, 8 K boys also coming and telling us their role models are those who stand up for nationalism and extremely, like we say that the toxic masculinity term is very, very, in vogue these days. हाँ, so, देश के लिए लड़ेगा, जो दुश्मन को मारेगा, और दुश्मन कौन है वो तो जैसे लोग कहते हैं कि कोई एक पर्टिकुलर है ना कपड़े पहनने वाले लोग हैं वही दुश्मन है, वही भाषा बच्चे भी बोल रहे हैं. So if at the national level, policy level, school books level, health and education policy level, we are not changing the norms, challenging the norms, any level of micro programming is going to create a smaller change of gender and attitude and behavior, which we measure empirically. Randomized control trial करते हैं, change देखते हैं, longitudinal study करते हैं, we watch. So what is changing? Regression analysis लगाओ, ये लगाओ. वो regression analysis लगाइए आप 10 साल बाद, या अब से 2 साल बाद यही माहौल रहेगा, तो वो regression ही रहेगा. Nothing will come out of it. That's what I feel.
This brings us to another issue of public spaces. In public spaces, the genders are not meeting in a healthy way, and a whole lot of, the societal thinking is also very regressive. For example, the public celebrated the killing, the encounter of the, rapists. Alleged rapists, yes, that's very correct word, absolutely. And the public celebrated, and again going back into this whole protectionist kind of an attitude, that we are there to support you, we are there to protect you, we'll take care of you, but only you be careful, don't go out of the house. So how does this public spaces pan out when it comes to work participation of women, with the rise of these kind of incidents and these kind of reactions to the incidents? Are the public places shrinking for women? What do you feel?
I will not be able to answer that in general for everyone else, because I had been living in a city, Bombay, and the struggle, the daily struggle of the city itself is like that. I don't think that shrinking of public places was something that I had experienced there in the first place. But yes, this hyper masculinity and a definition of suddenly, you know, this Adarsh Balak calendar kind of posters is reappearing once again. But I think there is one discourse of yes, disengagement with male and stuff like that, that is definitely there. But there is also another thing which bothers me is the island of privileges which most of us live in, and we refuse to acknowledge that, because even in places, I'm thinking of formal places where there are policies in place, like there is a 26 weeks of maternity leave, there are few companies are even giving them equal paternity leaves and stuff. But we are not understanding that even at that point in time, when the women who are working in those workplaces, like especially for me and many others, are able to continue work in formal workplaces because of less privileged, poorer women who are getting lesser paid in your houses. So when you are speaking about rights and representation of women, it's very important to understand that it is a heterogeneous group, and at every point in time you have to speak of each and every group. It will include adolescent girls, yes. It will include your own domestic help, yes. It will also include the transgender women who maybe because of the CA not even get an acknowledgement of being a citizen at all, especially if they have transitioned and have not got that. So I think that is a very, capitalism actually had divided us very interestingly. And then there are also this, leave aside the hyper masculine tropes, there are also tropes of this very successful modern women who we are always seeing speaking a certain kind of language, going to certain places, which is a disconnect to most of others. So I think we have stopped speaking a common language and connecting with each other on the common grammar of struggle. And I think that to me is more bothersome than, yes, we have to engage with males, they also should like to engage with us. I'm keeping them outside now, and suddenly I do not want to be very generous and be open and say, okay, yes, come now, we need to endorse you also, teach you also, train you also, do all these things also. Yeah, we have many other things to do and many other fights to learn. But at this point of time, at least understanding sisterhood, and why I brought the principle, the notion of that movie is that they're opting out of the job because of a basic right of disrespect of my sisterhood was an option then people thought. Now I would wait for the opportunity to climb the ladders and show that, boss, I have leaned in, I had been able to climb up the ladder, I had been able to rise this position. If I can, why can't you? I think these two are very non-intersecting parallel stories which somehow needs to be brought together, in fact.
And how will that happen? Would you like to give your opinion on this?
No solutions actually, but it's just very interesting, which reminds me when you say about this that, how does my workplace treat me? And it's really interesting that, over the years, again, when we talk about the toxic masculinity, we also see that we really enjoy the extremes, we always enjoy it. So if it is femininity, then it's asli. If it is, masculinity, then it's asli. Kya asli hai? Asli desh bhakti kya hai? Asli kya? Extremes, ekdam, aapko wo chahiye. Now, the thing is, it's masculinities as such, the whatever traits, norms, ways of functioning, behaviors, they are not specifically biologically coming, right, with you when you are born. It's all socialized. And even at the workplace, more and more, as we have continued to, work within the gender, in the space of gender equality, we have seen that people also expect women to come up as
the same image of a masculine leader. So if you're successful, you need to have such traits. You need to have such leadership qualities which are celebrated by the so-called leaders who displayed those masculine traits. Now, there's always a trade-off. If I need to be successful, I need to have XYZ qualities. And in this XYZ, almost 80% of it are those qualities which are really required, which we tick the boxes of the extreme, masculine identity. And again, so Buri Aurat also comes on the extreme masculine identities wala. So it's a very interesting intersection that what women also start emulating in largely in the workforce, work arena area, that we have also given into that competition. To be leaders, you need to be really masculine. Come on, to be a leader, I can be, as accommodating of any of my male or female colleagues' demands of personal care, mental health, any kind of reservations, personal issues around not feeling well. You don't have to be really a taskmaster to be a leader. So that is where also, both these pressures have been maintained again by all the genders, and workplaces are continuously holding up these norms of who is the ideal worker, who's the ideal leader, who's the ideal team member. So these are little critical things.
So ultimate analysis, do we feel that this dividend, the demographic dividend, is it going to throw up more opportunities for either gender, or are they going to be creating more problems? Primarily because we do not have the policy initiatives which will help either of the genders.
Okay, so I look at it more as a gap, which can be looked at as a potential solution. Maybe I think so, is that whenever we're speaking about agency, I think we always speak about agency on very esoteric terms, right? If I want to speak to the women that I have worked with on a common understandable language of agency, I really don't know how I'm going to translate that. And I think that vernacular, that vocabulary we need to learn. The other important thing is that if we see the structures of power right now, and if we see the other, I'm not saying they're necessarily male, but where this potential power comes from, it comes from your rights to access to capital and assets. So if you look into the SDGs, there is a policy under SDG 5, there is women's rights to assets and capital. Look into all the countries and see how many countries actually has even accepted that as a goal to work towards. Leave aside that, it's even a tier 2 goal, not even a tier 1. Tier 2 goal means that I understand what it means, but I have not set a target and a definition to it. So as long as you don't target the real thing, which is differentiating, patriarchy is based on capitalism, and capitalism is nothing but holding of assets in your hand. If you do not address that and do not create equal opportunities, we will always keep on speaking about agency in very softer tones and say that, oh, we need to now embrace them also and train them also and that also. I may have a very radical view at this point of time, but I think this actually is one of the biggest gap when it comes to holding of assets between men and women at this point in time. Yeah.
Just as concluding remarks, there is, for me, I feel that changing the power relations, there has to be a gender relational approach to working on these issues, be it the issue of equality in education or the equality at workplace. Until we are going to change the power relations between different genders, and work in a more gender transformative way, which is by engaging both men and women, if we are only talking about binaries, and also if we are talking about the larger spaces where all genders, people of all sexual identities, orientations. So again, within that space also, there is a lot of there are a lot of remnants of the patriarchal norms of the so-called heteronormative framework of how we all behave with each other. So challenging that, taking along everyone, and I think with a lot of love, respect and dignity is the only way forward.
Thank you. Given this kind of topic and the number of issues it pans, I think it's difficult to even do justice even to one point. But the takeaways from this session, as I find, is that we need a common language. We need to include both the genders in this, in the policy framework. We need to also talk about the changing power relationships and try to change the relationship, the power balance between the genders. And finally, also to look at the real concrete issues, like, for example, like Paulomi had pointed out, the right to assets and capital as one of the major policy initiatives that one has to take up. If you are really looking at, filling the gender gap. Right now, I think we have come to this kind of a conclusion towards the end, but we have looked at several issues coming up. It included so many things at different life stages of the demographic dividend. And obviously, there will not be answers, but at least there are two takeaways that we can work on when we go back from here. Thank you.
First of all, I never said I'm going to leave out the men. I'm not going to leave out the men. I just think that that is not my priority right now, and that I'm speaking as an individual. And I'm not representing my source of work at this point of time. I would love to, but the question is, there are certain other priorities which needs to be addressed. For me, access to certain basic assets and rights needs to be addressed. And the interesting part is that, and that has been proved across all levels, if someone already is in a position of privilege and that is giving them dividends, it's very difficult to convert them to get to leave that. You need to fight it out. And while fighting it out, you have to be on the other side sometimes. You always cannot co-opt everyone. I think this option of co-option is really irritating me, and we had tried to co-opt, right? I may sound like a cliche, but last 15 days we are seeing what co-option has led to many of the things. That's precisely, I'm very clear on certain agendas which I think are important. In your family inheritance laws, in your succession laws, look into the property of inheritance for women. Simple example, I had a marriage under Special Marriage Act where religions is not important. Look at the inheritance laws there. So you cannot have right to succession property of your father, inherited property, because sampatti to apne kaum mein hi rahega na, we will not let it do. So once you don't try understanding those politics of that, co-opting is a softer power play, do that, that's a game of the privileged, it's okay. But जब तक उतरोगे नहीं सड़कों पे, हल्ला नहीं करोगे, तब तक कोई छोड़ेगा नहीं आपको कुछ, in fact. अच्छा, another thing, I don't hate men. I am living with one, it's okay.
That was an addition, not something to be answered. Yeah, but I agree. Probably this topic should have been discussed by a manel.
I think we have enough men in enough other corners of this world. It's okay if 3 women discuss something about gender. It's okay. Like, don't judge us onto every other grammar, yaar, that this needs to be grammatically correct if 3 other people of this panel. It doesn't matter.
I would just want to add here that I personally believe like gender is an issue for men and women both. We are not talking about women empowerment alone. We are talking about gender equality and gender relations. So I think for this time you can bear with us. Next time we'll try to, make a panel which has a lot of my male colleagues, young people working out there in the field, constantly challenging the gender relations at home, in their personal lives, everywhere. Men can be loving, men can be respectful.